Turn-based strategy games really came into their own in the 90s, and haven't really suffered a low point in popularity since. There were the big hitters of the era, and a number of others that, while very good fun and commercially successful, do seem to fly under the radar a tad too often. Deadlock is one of these. It's well thought of and good enough to have solidified a slot on GOG.com, but perhaps not prominent enough to feature in casual conversation. And that's a shame. There is a lot of things within the game that seem quite unique to me, and I find myself returning to it way more often than most others. Welcome then to YesterYear's Mac Games, where today's subject of interest happens to be one of my favourite turn-based strategy titles. A game of Deadlock sees between 2 and 7 alien races dogpiling onto the fictional planet Gallius IV in an attempt to claim it for the glory of their respective empires. This results in a big squabble that can take anything from a couple of hours to literally days. Boxed copies of the game for the PC are quite plentiful and inexpensive. As is usually the case, however, the Macintosh port is much scarcer. I imported this one from Germany. There wasn't any domestically in the UK that I could see. So, let's crack it open. Inside is the game, obviously, a registration card, a user manual with information on how to install and play, and most interesting in my opinion, the Colonist Guidebook. This has the backstory, some decent-sized write-ups of the history and capabilities of the races, and documentation on the researchable technologies, buildings, and units. The backstory itself? Well, it's quite elaborate, but still manages to come across as a bit rushed and condensed in terms of how it's been written, as if they didn't want the additional cost of adding some more pages to the booklet to do it completely. Naturally, after that comment, it seems entirely appropriate that I condense it further. So, the Sith, spelt with a C, found the insectoid Chit-Chit and gave them spaceflight. They both then joined an alliance with the burly Tarth and coerced the Marg to come along too. They then had a bit of a broil with the know-it-all Relu and the humans, which concluded after the Marg switched sides after having been forced off their homeworld by the Sith and becoming very ill as a result. As this was concluding, the Skiranene, who were posing as traders up until this point, attacked everyone at once, blew up the Earth's moon, and underestimated the human reaction, which was ferocious. Combined with assaults from everyone else and some guerrilla stuff from the Uva Mosque, they were pushed back, opening up a new chunk of space for everyone else to explore. As a result of a couple of runestones that each side of the initial war possessed, they all found themselves drawn to a particular bit of space, where they all found Gallius IV. Each race saw this new planet as the solution to all of their problems. The Chit-Chit were overpopulated and needed new ground. The Sith saw potential for experimentation to aid their objective of becoming beings of pure thought, which is understandable actually. Imagine having to tolerate one of these dangling off your face. The humans wanted it to help boost their economy, the Marg saw it as an opportunity to cure their ailments, and so on and so forth. So, yet another big space battle erupted between them all, that culminated in a Tarth ship crashing into the planet, which almost incinerated the entire thing with a hyperdrive explosion. Well, that just wouldn't do. So, realising that more fighting would simply result in no planet for anyone, representatives from all races popped down to the ruined craft to settle the planet's ownership with a pact, which just so happened to be an appropriate scenario for a strategy game. Fancy that. The faction that built the best colony on the planet would be allowed to keep it. So, with the exception of the Skiranene, who refused to sign the pact and stomped off in a sulk, 500 colonists of each race flew down to the planet's surface to begin. Deadlock's system specifications are quite modest, running nicely enough on a 68040 processor with System 7.1 and 8 megs of RAM. Most discs come with version 1.0 on it, although I started with this myself and couldn't progress into later game without frequent Type 2 errors crashing it. These are mostly solved with the 1.1 patch, so definitely apply that before playing. A game will unfold along the lines of this. After customizing the world, game options, and win conditions, players pick a race, then a starting position. Beginning with a population of 400, which equates to 4 colonists to instruct, the player can schedule construction of things, and shift the figures around the sites to speed stuff up. This is how a player essentially assigns labour to the various industries. The other 100 individuals are ready to roll in a colonizer, which can be dragged onto another territory, set to build colony in its mission panel, and left for a turn to take command of wherever it's been put. Should a player find their starting territory to be next to one of these things, it benefits to take steps to secure it nice and early. The nature of the industries that can be constructed within the territories don't exactly push the boat out. Production of food, power, and resources to build stuff are the initial ones, so once all of those have been set up, a player can start to look at progressing in other ways. Build and send out some laser squads to run around the map. A few technologies can be discovered by being the first to move a unit on a specific territory, although those are generally researched in labs. Eventually, all the players will have grown their colonies to the point where they start falling over each other, and combat becomes inevitable. Fighting over newer territories to secure their resources is generally what happens first, as more established territories tend to become heavily fortified rather quickly. Quickly building up infrastructure in controlled locations after settling there is paramount, and moving spare colonists from one territory to another can be a huge help. The population of established colonies increases a lot faster than new ones, so you can easily relieve your starting area of about 8 to have them replenished there within a couple of turns. One thing I particularly like is the game's technology tree. It's all as sci-fi as it's possible to get, with the impossible mixed with the ludicrous, for some creative civilization advances. As a result of researching, new buildings that are more productive than the predecessors will come along, stronger units will become available, and costs to do certain things will fall. I think the progression is pretty well paced, although it is accelerated for the Mark, as that is their perk. Each race has a few. The Tarth, for instance, have a stronger military, the Chit-Chit's population grows very fast, and the Relu can see what's going on every tile. None of the perks are particularly elaborate, so I do feel it's quite balanced. Completely unrelated to actual gameplay is this messaging system.
Your fancy junk is nothing.
Which I think is great. Each race features a surprisingly broad selection of insults.
Do not overestimate your minor abilities.
Threats.
We'll jump on your head. Twice.
Brags.
Tarth cooks make best strudel.
And complaints.
We are sad as we watch you achieve so much glory.
That are all fully voiced and animated.
Twist your muscles all day. It's all you possess of any significance.
I found these particularly fun to screw around with on network games, when one or more of the other players are micromanaging something unnecessary and taking ages to finish their turn. The network features, by the way, work very well. Here's a photo I tweeted a bit over a year ago of a local game I set up on 3 Pismos. It took us most of the day to play, and was brilliant, with the balance of power shifting dramatically mid-game as one of my opponents who had favoured early military power eventually fell behind in production and as a result was slowly beaten back. Advanced games will see players producing military units at an insane rate, and battles will start to occur almost every turn. These are completely hands-off. You can tell the units to fight in a particular way before they start. But on the whole, they will do their own thing. It's probably just as well, as a large-scale scrap is complete chaos. An effective attack will consist of a few of every kind of unit, due to the limited number of each type that can be stacked on one square. All the units placed on a location will take part in a fight, but the victor's excess will simply disappear afterwards. I feel the key thing that Deadlock could have done with is perhaps a more sophisticated notification system and menu interface. Each turn begins with the advisor providing a summary of what's going on, but before long, clicking through these will become a chore. The important combat ones are at the front, which is something, but having all of these categorized by type or location and then put in a list could have been a much quicker way to absorb information. Something similar for the build menu could have been good too. Selectable tabs perhaps, for different types of buildings. Deadlock's biggest frustration, however, comes along later on in the game, after a player has spread themselves over a larger distance. Trying to keep on top of unit production and building upgrades is a pain in the arse, with the process about as elegant as a Tarth ballerina. If a building finishes constructing its unit queue, it does nothing. You have to manually restore the sliders to one of its other functions, or add something else. But doing so means having to remember that it's actually finished what it's doing in the first place. Notifications for this sort of thing are buried within the rest of them, but they aren't descriptive enough. What would really have helped, and I guess actually that it was an idea that no one had back when the game was made, is a little button next to the end of turn button displaying the number of buildings currently sat doing Suite FA. Clicking on it would cycle through the idle constructions and would eliminate manually looking through every single territory every couple of turns, double-clicking on each and every building to make sure it was doing something useful. The AI also has its limitations. The difficulty buttons seem to change how much resources they have rather than their tactics, and the behaviour is not one that could be described as capable of maximising every opportunity. They don't really expand properly or efficiently, so the harder difficulty levels are, at least to me, incredibly dangerous during early game, when fast production of things are arguably the most critical, before gradually sliding into the mundane as the player gets themselves established. For a proper challenge, find another human who knows how to play and take them on. I feel that these shortcomings are down to the game having aged, rather than there being anything fundamentally wrong with it. Endless Space has spoilt me with all its excellent little ways to keep on top of production. Deadlock therefore remains very playable today, and it's still quite good to look at. Mostly. The soundtrack is fleshed out with different tracks for each race, and effort went into its writing and character development. Overall, the game makes a worthy addition to any shelf of big box games, and it's well worth the asking price on GOG. It's worth noting that Deadlock got a sequel, although the consensus is that Deadlock 2 is more of a deluxe version of the first, with a few more units, gimmicks, and better quality video clips, but no fundamental overhaul of graphics or gameplay, so ultimately not enough to really warrant purchase if one already has the first. Deadlock wasn't, of course, the only strategy title for classic macOS, so if you found this review interesting, by all means check out some of the others I've done. Otherwise, pop your thoughts and memories in the comments, and subscribe to keep on top of future content. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.